My favorite screenwriting technique would have to be setup and payoff, which is pretty well demonstrated, I feel, in Richard Curtis's Notting Hill starring Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts. Early in the movie, when the two characters are first meeting, Julia Roberts' character has invited Hugh Grant to a press junket, but he didn't realize what it was, so he's not a press member at all. But people are asking, who are you? Who are you with? And he just sees this magazine on a table, and he's like, I'm with a horse and hound, or however he says it in his Hugh Grant way. And so that's a funny joke there that's sort of carried out, because when people are watching him, he has to ask questions for her in a sort of hunter-type way, posing questions such as, did you act with horses a lot? And it's a space movie. But in the very last part of the movie, the last scene, he's chasing her before she leaves on a plane to never come back. And it's another press junket, but this time it's in a room full of reporters who are asking the questions, and she'll point out and say, you, yes. And then they'll ask her questions. And so he stands there and he raises his hand, and then so she points at him and he says, I'm with the horse and hound. And so that's just a recurring joke that calls back to the very beginning of the movie, right there at the end. And it adds to the humor, and it's a very serious moment, but it's a moment that's rewarding the audience for paying attention for the whole movie. And there's a lot of examples in Notting Hill like that, where there's a recall back to things in the first act or even in the middle that really rewards the viewer for paying attention.
I think one of the most important screenwriting techniques is the use of comic relief. And I think one of the best examples of the use of comic relief, especially in a drama, is Bo Goldman's screenplay for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is one of the great dramas of all time, but it has a lot of great comic relief scenes, especially when the main character is played by Jack Nicholson. His name is McMurphy, and he's complete rebel. And the movie's set in a mental institution, for those who haven't seen the movie. And this is a film that has, suicides and assaults, and I mean, it's really, really heavy dramatic stuff. But if you notice, all of those dramatic moments are preceded a scene or two beforehand by a really great comic scene where all the characters are together and they have an experience. There's scenes with them playing Monopoly or them playing cards. And the scene before the dramatic scene at the end, when McMurphy assaults Nurse Ratched, the scene before that is when all the characters in the mental institution, they all get drunk. And McMurphy gets on the microphone and says, medication time, which of course echoes what the nurses have been saying the whole movie. So, I mean, it's just great that, when you have those comic moments before the dramatic moments, it makes the dramatic moments so much better and so much more meaningful.
One of my favorite screenwriting techniques would be what we describe as a reversal. In the movie Limitless, written by Leslie Dixon, we have where the character actually gets what he wants early in the screenplay, and instead of much later on. And so this is a very good technique where the writers actually give their characters what they want instead of holding it out for much later. And as a result of the character getting what he or she wants, they end up learning in the long run that it's actually not what they want at all.
My favorite screenwriting technique is showing and not telling. And I think there's a lot of this in the movie Back to the Future, written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. And one of my favorite reasons for this is the characterizations between Marty and Doc. And you can see this when their first interaction, or their first encounter between each other, when Doc is showing how the time machine works and doing the first test. And he gives Marty the camera, and Doc has the remote control, and they're both in the path of the DeLorean. And while he's revving it up to 88 miles an hour, Marty kind of steps to the side, and Doc just stops, looks at Marty, looks at the ground, and then looks at Marty again. And Marty steps back into place. And I really think it's a great scene because they're just so, quirky together. And it just tells a lot in that short little time.
One of my favorite screenwriting techniques is revealing a character through dialogue. And I don't think anyone does this better than the Coen brothers. They do it beautifully in The Big Lebowski. How do you take three bowlers who have nothing in common but are all friends and get them to reveal the essence of their character through about a page and a half talking about a rug, an area rug? I think being a writer, one of the most important things is not just to be able to write observations to specifically fill a frame on the page, but part of writing is listening. Because when we listen to how actual human beings interact and talk, that's when you actually hear the sweet spots of what is human speech. And then that enables you to write more realistic dialogue.
A screenwriting technique I love is one-liners, especially when used for comic relief. I think James L. Brooks does this really well in As Good as It Gets. His character, Melvin Udall, is a really unlikable character. He's a nasty, grumpy old man, which you could possibly never like in the real world. For instance, he, in the opening scene, shoves a really cute small dog down a trash chute. In our minds, this is horrific. But as he shoves the dog down the trash chute, he says, "This is New York, pal. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere." And we laugh, even though it's a horrible, horrible instance. We laugh anyway, and we laugh with him because we know it's funny, and that's what makes us love him.
One of my favorite screenwriting techniques is the way Billy Wilder uses curiosity. For example, in Sunset Boulevard, you want to turn the page. Every time he goes up the staircase to Norma Desmond's home and the monkey's arm falls out, he pulls you in. He gives only little bits of information, and he even adds ellipsis at times to really just entrap you.
I really admire misdirection as a screenwriting technique. Specifically, the way, or the writer that I admire the most in that regard is Dan Fogelman. He Cars, Tangled, but most recently Crazy Stupid Love. And misdirection is basically leading the audience somewhere that you want them to go, where they really don't expect to be going. What he does is he plants a seed at the beginning of the film, or beginning of the script, with a name, Nana. And as you go throughout the entire script, you always see somebody call Nana or talk about Nana, but you never see Nana. And you get to the end, and you're expecting this mother to show up or this grandmother to show up. And when it comes to actually meet Nana, you realize that it's the sister or the daughter of the main character. And it being the sister or the daughter, you know, this particular character, it being, you know, in the movie it was the main character was played by Steve Carell, but it being his daughter Hannah, it's one of those twists that comes along once in a blue moon. And it can only happen through misdirection.
One of the most important things I ever learned was from Frank Danielle at USC Film School. And he said that a film story isn't just about events. I mean, yes, obviously there are story events, but every event is made up of a preparation, the event, and the aftermath. If you don't show the character's preparation for that event coming up, if you don't show the aftermath of how that affects the character, we never know what the character hoped for or feared about that event. You don't know how the event changes him, whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually, in any sort of way. But if you follow those important events in your story, don't forget to show the preparation, all the hopes and the anticipation that are going on with that character toward that event, and then the aftermath, whether it's a success and pushes the character onto the next thing, or it's a failure and the character has to deal with adjusting emotionally, physically. That's very, very important. Robert McKee talks about the fact that a story isn't really plot-driven or character-driven, but that plot affects character and character affects plot. And I think it's very important for the writer to understand, even if you are telling an action story that will stay with us is one in which the character is on a journey, the character is changing, the character grows. If otherwise, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. McKee also talks about don't have a scene that doesn't turn. He says no scene that doesn't turn. And that is, if you look at the scene that you're writing and you figure out what's at stake in this scene, whether it's a life or death issue or it's a social issue, romantic love, whatever that is, that if nothing happens in the scene that changes the character, even if it's something slight, like the character learns a new piece of information, then if there's nothing in there in which the character's goals or his value charged life, he talks about the value of a scene, or is it positive or negative on these particular issues. If nothing changes, then probably the only thing going on in the scene is exposition, and it should be cut out. And I firmly believe that. One of my absolute favorite movies, and that I teach on all the time, is LA Confidential. It's a brilliant film. It's 3 characters, 3 cops who each pursue justice in a different way, and they're trying to solve a murder, and there is not a single scene in which something significant doesn't happen for one or 2 or all of them. No scene that doesn't turn. If nothing changes in the life of your character, positive or negative, subtle or big, if nothing changes, you need to cut the scene.
There are so many examples of craft tools that writers use in screenwriting that are so critical to the storytelling process. It's kind of hard to pick one. But one of the guiding metaphors that I like to tell my students about can be found in the movie E.T. There's the famous scene where Elliot uses Reese's Pieces he lays the Reese's Pieces down one at a time as a way to tease the E.T. character out of the tool shed and to come out towards him. And it makes for a great scene because the boy is using something in his world that it ends up that the creature from another world essentially ends up liking what Elliot likes, which bonds them. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the whole screenwriting process really is about Reese's Pieces. It's about what I call the rate of revelation, about really having a masterful control over the information that you were leaving for the reader in a chain, just like Reese's Pieces, one at a time, pulling them into the story, laying these little hooks in, at a rate of revelation that keeps the reader reading, and it doesn't happen too fast, and there should also be a great enough interval between them, but not too big of an interval that the reader their interest begins to lag. So I use the metaphor of Reese's Pieces as a way to help younger writers sort of remember and fold into their mental operating system that idea.
I think the person that I got the most screenwriting technique from is Aristotle and his book, The Poetics. He was the one that told us it's our moral obligation to move audiences, to inspire empathy from our audiences, and the way to do this is to inspire pity in the first act, fear in the second act, and catharsis in the third act. I think a great example of this is Harper Lee's book To Kill a Mockingbird, which was adapted by Horton Foote, where we have the protagonist Scout, and we immediately feel pity for her. She's in tattered clothes, she's not very well cared for, she is being raised by Atticus, her single father, and she has a fascination with Boo Radley, who is the local boogeyman. So in that way, we immediately are feeling fear for her well-being as she goes about the story trying to draw Boo Radley out of his house. This man who has lots of stories about him and a violent past, and so we immediately feel fear for Scout in her various actions, and in the end we are brought to catharsis when Boo Radley actually is the one that saves her life and saves her from a drunk knife fight. Well, let's just say that Boo Radley is the one that saves her life and ends up being a bigger person than many of the people that are in that story. And so in that way, we are experiencing pity for Scout, fear for her well-being, and catharsis that the man she fears the most is actually the one that saved her life.